Tyler Alvarez is here to talk about housing first homeless services. Tyler, you're in San Diego.
Mhm.
You're a young guy who's been working on this issue for a while, actually, for being as young as you are. And I saw a tweet, which I will show people in a second, about your, I guess, realizations about the problems with the housing first model. And I think maybe that may not necessarily be a term that's familiar for a lot of people. It's interesting. I was covering housing first in Knoxville as a reporter in 2008, where they had this 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, and that
Right.
was the way they were going about it. So, why don't you tell everybody what does housing first mean, and then if there's anything else on the basics of like why you got into it that you want to add before we get into the details, go for it. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course, sure. Thanks for having me. So housing first basically is a method to combat homelessness, which basically means that our main objective is to find housing for the individual. That sort of process believes that if you get someone into housing, all the rest of their issues will fix themselves, right? So if they have a mental health disorder, if they have a drug issue, if their main issue is income, getting them into a house will, that their thought is change everything around. Um, Working for it for a full year, and before that doing kind of my own volunteer work through my college, I realized there's a lot more to be done than just providing homes and hoping that the rest fixes itself, because it's a whole person approach that you need more so than I would be just like, hey, here's your home and good luck, you got 9 months of rental assistance and you'll do fine, right? So I saw the nitty gritty of what it looks like to kind of just house someone and hope for the best. But prior to that, I was just in college for a while, and I did the student government deal. So I got to know my city really well and see the homeless situation. And at that time, Ventura County. I'm now in San Diego. So that kind of sparked it. And then when I moved, it just continued.
When I was covering it in Knoxville, what they would do is they'd build these, I guess, apartments.
Yeah.
But they would try to pair the residents with, like, social services. The idea was if you made it easier for them to go see a counselor, go to
Right.
rehab, so have shuttle services, whatnot, that that you would help put the puzzle together. So, did you work in that kind of model, or was it just like, "Here's a house or here's an apartment for a certain amount of time, but we're not gonna do anything else for you?"
Right. So my nonprofit, as most are, if you've ever really got intimate with them, they're low budget. So as I was focused on the veterans part, but I did see a wider range of all the programs. So the veterans portion, we did have a little more funding, and we did do more direct services with those veterans. But I did work with general homeless population of San Diego, and a lot of that was more so. Throw money at the problem and it'll fix itself. So we did provide, Uber, Lyft services to go get that individual to, say, an SSI appointment, which means like helping them get their social service income if they had literally zero income at all. Other services might be getting them to their doctor if they couldn't get there, to help with their mental health and all that, or just finding a general game plan on how we're going to attack the drug crisis, because we would have honest conversations with them. We did have no barrier to entry, right? So you could use and continue to use for the 9 months you were receiving rental assistance. So we didn't really have like a hard cutoff, um, but it was tough to see, even with all these services we would provide. Many clients wouldn't show up to meetings, wouldn't show up to a lot of the things that we would kind of pre-approve and plan, and we had all these funding for. So it was tough, definitely tough. Yeah.
So this is the tweet that a friend of mine sent me of yours. Working for a housing first nonprofit in San Diego allowed me firsthand, or showed me firsthand how giving homeless individuals an apartment in downtown and paying their rent for 9 months doesn't actually help anything and eventually makes their situation and the overall homeless situation worse. I work
Right.
directly with veterans, and part of the housing first model means our organization did not require the client to be sober in order to receive or maintain housing general services. At first, this sounded right to me, but after housing over 50 homeless veterans and seeing literally all of them back on the street with their continued addiction after our 9 months of rental assistance was finished, I realized this was a toxic cycle. Each client had a case manager working with them during our 9 months of rental assistance to get them to find work or help find services to aid their drug problem. But once we found housing, the client wouldn't be as responsive, sometimes not answering calls for months. After 9 months, was up, the client would then just hop to new housing first provider and find another new apartment in downtown San Diego and begin the cycle again. When I got to see this progressive policy in action, I quickly realized not only is it not progressive, but it makes the client more reliant on others for help instead of building that person up to become someone who is self sufficient and a contributing member of society. I was fresh out of college and that was my first job. I thought I was helping the city I was living in and helping the people who needed it most, when in reality, we were putting a bandage on a large cut, hoping the bleeding would stop. And just if people want to follow you on Twitter, it's at TY_G_A.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, before you go into anything you want to say, like on background about this or why you decided to tweet and everything about it, what was the reaction that you got? And especially from the people who do the kind of work you do, because I'm sure that it wasn't necessarily the most popular.
Right, right. Yeah, like you said, this is a hot topic button, not just California, but it touches all American cities. So I believe why this kind of went low key viral was just that sensitivity of it all, and everyone kind of, either whether you're in a major city or whatever, you know someone or you've seen homelessness around you. So through the pandemic, I've seen San Diego get progressively worse and progressively more hands off with their policy towards combating homelessness, towards helping homeless individuals, towards, like I said, they're making a person self-sufficient instead of reliant on the state. So at the time, I was walking through downtown and I noticed this one portion of downtown. It's called East Village. It's where most of the homeless service providers kind of stay. It grew by at least twofold. So I decided to make a tweet. And at the time, I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. Michael Schellenberger was on, and he had just so much to say about what was going on in San Francisco. And it kind of mirrored on a larger scale what I was seeing over here in San Diego. So it sparked something in me, and just to write it and kind of shout him out, because I think his book San Francisco is great, and his policies in there and kind of some of the stats he shows really highlights the issue with housing first, and some really good off ramps on how we can make some next steps onto helping these folks get back on their feet and being, like I said in that tweet, self-sufficient. But going back to how was the responses? It varied. I think a lot of the people who do work in this environment kind of want to say what I say, but we're in such an insulated bubble where everyone around us is this progressive type who wants to, hey, let's all help the people. It's hard times and all those buzz points and talking points that didn't make it harder. But I do believe the housing portion of this nonprofit I work for, we were more realistic onto what would make a successful person, but there did seem to be a disconnect between street outreach and then the people like me who were actually housing these folks.
Mm-hmm. I have a really good friend who works in LA. This isn't the only issue that she works on. She's kind of like an organizer, I guess, of sorts, for different policies. And I recently saw that she was working on like a new tax to give money to basically this kind of project. And I think it was something for like, if you sell a house over $5 million, you're going to owe like another cut of that is going to go towards homeless services. And I think a portion of that to this kind of model, to the housing first model. Right. Talk to me a little bit, I guess, about the money side of this, because there are questions from people, I think, and folks maybe not necessarily as close to it as you are, about like, is it just like an endless money pit, I guess, that people just benefit from, I guess, from the organization standpoint, right. Or are they just, they're not necessarily nefarious people, but they still really believe it works, but it just hasn't had enough time to work itself out yet. I knew a lot of policymakers in my work in TV news that like genuinely believe that putting more money and more time that's just what they needed. We just haven't seen enough time. We haven't seen enough money. We haven't had enough time, that kind of thing. So talk to me a little bit about the money, issue. Cause it does seem like I said, seeing what my friend was doing and then just hearing it from you and your side of it, that there is like this disconnect from people who think that like, no, the money is not doing what we think it's doing. And the other people who are like, we just need more.
Right. Yeah. So from the leads and from the higher ups, and I was in a lot of those meetings where we would talk about policy funding, and all those good things. And as you expect from the top, it was all like, we just need more money, we need more housing, we need more permanent housing, we need more, on site. I believe in LA they just built a big site, 74 home site for for homeless individuals, and that just goes back to the increasing budget. And I think I did send you this Hill article, and they write a lot about just the increase of budget over the past couple of years, and since I believe a couple administrations of presidents ago, when they really started to push hard on this housing first policy. But yeah, in all of my meetings I've ever had, it was always, hey, we need to house people to show that we are meeting our metrics, so we can show the city, show the state that we are doing what this program is entailing, right? And so what a data point looked like is, once you house someone, that was a success. There was no data point structure for, hey, if someone were to successfully kick their drug habit or successfully get a job with successful income, that would be success, right? It was only about housing. So the more we housed, the more funding we did get. And it was always about increasing. Specifically for the veterans, we had a little more to push on because of so much they've done for our country. But there was a program called Whole Person Wellness, which was the general homeless population. And that was just one of the hot programs at the time. And that was being funded nonstop, even if our numbers weren't great, which was consistently being reported in our monthly meetings. We were still getting funding from private and public sources. So more money does not help this at all. If anything, it distributes money to the same locations we were already housing previous people. So it was just a vicious cycle, honestly, passing it between some of the same people who did business with our organization for years.
Before we get to the rest of this interview, don't forget you can support my work and my ability to bring you interviews like this one by checking out my sponsors. The first is AllisonWinePromo.com. That's Allison with 1L winepromo.com. You get 50% off of my favorite Malbecs from Argentina. One of these wines comes from almost 9,000 feet, so an extreme altitude Malbec. Another comes from the oldest vineyard in Argentina. And then the third in this particular pairing actually uses natural fermentation and zero filtration, which is pretty cool. They also use no flavoring, no filtering, and no dyes and no excess chemicals. And you get 50% off shipping too. So 50% off the wine itself, 50% off shipping, and you get to support my work. So what's better than that, right? You can also go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. These are high altitude, USDA certified organic Nicaraguan roasts. You can choose from a wide variety of coffees, but also a tea that is made from the coffee fruit. I cold brew mine for 24 hours, but you can do it hot as well. Anyway, whatever you're drinking, wherever you are, don't forget to support free speech. Go check out my sponsors, and let's continue on with this video. So this is the article that you sent me, Lessons Learned from a Failed Bet on Housing First. And it's an opinion article, Representative Roger Williams and Michelle Steeb. I think it's, opinion contributors. So it starts off saying, buried deep within thousands of pages of the current Democrat partisan reckless tax and spending bill is a $24 billion housing voucher program doomed to fail from the start. This seemingly benign proposal provides no requirements, housing vouchers to help select populations, including those who have experienced domestic violence and those transitioning from incarceration. While this may sound good, this proposed program is based on a larger failed policy that has proven to be detrimental for the vulnerable American citizens it was intended to help. This is what I thought was interesting. In 2008, the Bush administration introduced Housing First to treat the chronically homeless population, largely the street homeless, which back then and today represent only 10 to 20% of the total homeless population. They argued that the provision of government subsidized housing vouchers with no preconditions or service participation requirements was the way to get those living on the streets to accept housing. In 2013, the Obama administration inaugurated Housing First as a one-size-fits-all solution to homelessness with no evidence it would work for all Americans experiencing homelessness. They promised it would end homelessness in a decade. And I remember this. I mean, I remember covering this. Like I was saying, it was the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness in Knoxville, Tennessee. And while you're talking, I'm going to look up one of the latest articles on that. But I know that they did not end chronic homelessness in 10 years. So It's just interesting though that it started under the Bush administration. That would be not the administration, I guess, that I was originally thinking that it would, and then expanded under Obama. I, I'm curious, what are your thoughts like when it comes to
Mhm.
like it doesn't, I guess it's kind of a bipartisan thing. It
Right.
doesn't seem like, but we always hear in California that it's just the liberals are just ruining the state. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about that. What's the makeup there now when it comes to
Yeah.
this?
I think when you look at policy and when you look at funding, and funding for programs, you can get a lot of bipartisan push for those. So when you're looking at major cities that have the biggest homeless issue, we're talking San Francisco, New York, LA. Those are, mainly Democratic run, left run. But when you talk money to all sides of the party lines, you'll usually get some consensus. So what this, housing first, what it means is we're gonna utilize with the already existing units and infrastructure we have around the cities that we're implementing this policy in. But it also means we're going to tear down existing, maybe old school businesses, maybe old school city blocks, whatever it may be, and we're gonna uprise a different a whole block of housing, whether that be low income subsidized Section 8. So when you look at housing first, it does mean let's utilize what's already there, but it also there's a huge push for let's increase the budget, let's increase the homeless budget, the city budget, the state budget, and let's put more money into this problem, which then greases the wheels for everyone, because now you're talking creating homes, paying other people to do the work, and it's I believe in that case it's more of a money issue, and when money talks, you can get a lot of the sides of the playing field on board. So I think that's where it comes from, because we did have meetings with policy members and donors from each side of the line, and both seemed to be a part, on board with this. But always when you talk to them in the nitty gritty about, hey, what about sustaining this person for 9 months, and what does it look like after our 9 months of rental assistance is done? Can they sustain this rent? Are they going to be evicted? Are they going to be homeless with an eviction now on their record too? Then it becomes a whole different conversation. So I think when you're looking at money, you can get a lot of bipartisan agreement.
Right, because Knoxville, Tennessee is a conservative area.
Right.
I mean, it may be a little bit more left leaning than some outside rural
Right.
Tennessee cities, but I wouldn't I wouldn't characterize it as a like a leftist stronghold or anything.
Sure. Sure.
But it's interesting. So this is the article, "What Happened to the 10-Year Plan to End Homelessness," which just the title of it, like asking the question, people just forgot about it, I
Right.
guess.
Right.
Um, and you just scroll down, and basically the synopsis of the article is that they're just doing more. They're expanding it. So
Yes.
it didn't. I mean, I don't want to, there's not, this isn't like an extensive article on like exactly
Sure.
what they achieve, but it's obvious that they said in 2014, the city introduced new and expansive guidelines for addressing homelessness. So it sounds like, the problem's still there, and maybe it's even
Yeah.
worse. And so
Yeah.
they're doing more. And so it just seems like that kind of aligns with what you're saying. Like
Definitely.
you end up, you end up like just expanding instead of saying, oh, we have, okay, at the end of 10 years now we can start bringing down
Right.
the assault on on homelessness, or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
on whatever is causing it, and we can bring it down to sort of a simmer. But now it's like, no, we're just going to do more. So it's interesting to hear your perspective, and then to kind of look back on where I've been. So let me go over to locals, because there were a lot of questions from people there to
Great.
you. And I just want to give everybody over there a big thank you for submitting your questions. If you're not over at AllisonMorrow.locals.com, I don't know what you're doing, because you could be asking Tyler questions yourself, and you could tell him he's a total quack if you wanted to, but you missed your chance if you're not there. So, Tyler, the first question, what do you think of BlackRock? And I think I heard this morning they were like buying up a lot of housing. So I'm guessing
Yeah.
that's what this person's talking about.
Right. Yeah. BlackRock is it's a big corporate company who seems to be preying on mom and pops, really, who are owning multiple units and renting. Right now in San Diego, I'm in a unit where it used to be a large home cut up into multiple rental units. These aren't the places that are being targeted, but what are being targeted are maybe long-lasting apartment units who, over the pandemic, were hit hard, maybe losing a lot of their rental clients and couldn't afford upkeep, so they had to sell and sell probably cheap. So BlackRock is coming in and kind of sweeping up all those opportunities. And if we have less and less Americans owning, that's just not a good look for our future, and that definitely won't help at all in this fight for affordable housing. That as we've all seen over the past couple of years, housing prices have risen so much, specifically in my town, San Diego. I think it's one of the highest increases in all of the states in America. So I've seen it firsthand. It's getting rough, and if this continues, it only get rougher.
I think this is from the Hill article, quote, policies that do not address the real root causes of homelessness and have exacerbated the homelessness condition in America, according to the federal government's October 2020 report. And the question is, what are the root causes of homelessness and how could they be addressed? And I think there were a lot of people that were asking that question, actually.
Yeah.
What did you, I know, you're a specific place and have only one slice of the pizza. But yeah, what were some of the issues you came across, especially the ones that you felt like were not addressed by the housing first model?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. What I mostly did see is some sort of drug issue that spiraled and could not be controlled. And that in turn made it hard for that individual to find work, to find real genuine friendship. They lost family. I believe a lot of us need a support system in hard times and in general times to kind of just get through life and happily. So a lot of these people had no real friends, had no real support system that only fueled this drug issue. So I believe most of it came from a drug issue that fueled this sense of loneliness, which then also would pile on and make their drug issue worse. I honestly dealt with more addiction in my year working in San Diego than I ever did in the 2 years doing my volunteer work, handing out food in like homeless shelters or churches or stuff like that. Working in a nonprofit organization where we were, paid to help house people. I saw some of the most extreme forms of addiction that I think I've ever seen before. So it's tough because when you get them into that home, some of them do start to make a life for themselves, but some of them also are now they're just given this space where they can invite friends, invite all this stuff, which we do too. But in this realm, we're trying to get them 9 months so they can be a full-fledged contributing member of society. And I believe giving these people, a lot of them, giving them apartments just only allowed that drug problem to just fester more and honestly cause problems with landlords, property managers, where I was getting phone calls, at all times of the night asking, can you come and mediate the issue down here, which was insane. So a lot of issues, but I do think that why it continued was the drug addiction. Yeah.
Have you listened to Mike Solen's podcast interviews with We Heart Seattle? It's a grift, homeless industrial complex. There are no means of measuring success and no reason to believe success is possible when they do not address people's issues. Does San Diego also enable the addictions of the homeless like Seattle?
Yeah. I don't, I haven't heard that podcast, but I'm going off just articles and, some of the stuff you kind of hear in media and things like that. My experience in the organization I was with, it wasn't a outright enablement, but it definitely was a not like any sort of like, hey, we need you to do this in order to give you continued assistance, because we all would love assistance. At the time when I was working, I was also doing 2 jobs to just pay the rent at my little place. So, I was understanding the struggles it was. So I do think it wasn't straight out like, hey, we weren't like, hey, you can continue to do drugs and we have no problem. It was more like we would see them using and not at all address that. I mean, I had countless times where I would go meet a brand new landlord. I'm hoping to introduce my client to that person, and they showed up completely intoxicated on whatever their drug or alcohol of choice may be, and you can only imagine how that went. So, yeah, it wasn't an enablement, but like I wasn't given the reins to kind of like, hey, we're not gonna go talk to this person today since you didn't decide to come, appropriately. So I wasn't given full power to kind of make my life and their life a little better at that time when it came to finding housing.
That's interesting. Okay, about 20 years ago, Seattle owned the first apartment building for drunks who wouldn't sober up for drunks who wouldn't sober up under the guise that we were spending even more money responding to emergency calls on the street. Seems like that wasn't the solution it was promised to be. The fact that there are so many people making money off the homeless with promises of even more money to come ensure that they'll never fix themselves out of a job. And then someone followed up. I remember that. I thought it was a pretty crazy idea. So, Seattle, maybe one of the first, I guess. I don't know. I didn't start reporting in Seattle until 2013,
Okay.
but I don't think it's interesting to see, I guess, the the progression of substance use because
Yeah.
I know obviously alcohol is a major issue, but nowadays it feels like heroin, the
Yeah.
opiate epidemic is really driving it, and then ends up being meth too. Whatever like the cheaper thing is at the time,
Right.
but yeah, Seattle I remember it being like in certain parts like the downtown area um
Hmm.
where you were allowed to camp and everything, like camping is allowed, and people would walk across I-5. Like you would just have to stop
Right.
on I-5. And I'm
Totally.
thinking to myself, how is this policy helping the guy that
Right.
just literally almost got smashed by my car or me as the citizen who's going
Totally.
to potentially go to jail? This
Right.
does not seem like this policy is like, they're just like right there on the highway and they just are walking across to go visit their neighbors as if they live on a
Right.
quiet cul-de-sac. And
Right.
I'm just like, this is unsafe for everybody. Who thinks this is a good idea? But obviously somebody does.
Yeah, and going off that, that person who you almost hit with your car most likely had shelter or housing open to them or available to them at that time. I've had multiple clients who straight up refused housing because the street gave them more friendship and they knew more people out there, or they were closer to the drug scene. Um, I've had people put tents up in their apartments because they would rather be in a tent than in an apartment. And when you get intaked into our program, you need an apartment or else you get outtaked because part of our data is to get you in an apartment. So if you don't want that, then we can't do anything for you, right? And we're talking here, you and I, about addiction, about helping this person become self-sufficient. And so if they don't want a home and that's what we believe makes you self-sufficient, we just wash our hands of you. Now what is that doing for the city? Is that now putting that person onto a new housing first environment, and how's their policies? Are they even more lenient? So yeah, I mean, I've seen just the wildest stuff in downtown San Diego. And there's a part in San Diego called Ocean Beach where if you ask any local, that that is one of like the hot spots for the homeless hangout. And during the pandemic, it got worse. You would see, one homeless individual to every five unhomeless, and now it's about three to every five unhomeless. So it's gotten worse for sure. Yeah, it's gotten tough.
Okay, what did he find that did help, if anything?
Yeah, I believe helping that person find their why. Their why was a big one. One success story I always love to tell was was a veteran mother of six. She had five boys and one fully autistic girl, and she had a why. She did have an issue with drugs and alcohol, but she showed up to every housing appointment I had for her, fully sober and fully lucid to talk to anybody about anything. So I think having a serious why, and we also helped her get some sort of part-time work, which definitely helped her in just feeling as if she was contributing and helping her children eat helping our children have a safe space to stay. That was a big win for me. That was one of the bigger housing spots that I did, that I saw, when someone has a why, a lot of things can get done. A lot.
Okay. When I was younger, I briefly slept on the side of a freeway. My half brother has been homeless much of his adult life, and a childhood friend of mine was homeless until he died train hopping in his 20s. I'm not someone who has been sheltered from homelessness. I've seen it up close. I say this only because I don't want you to think I'm heartless or think me heartless by my questions.
Hmm.
Speaking in broad generalities, what proportion of homeless people sincerely and devoutly and urgently want help to get out ASAP versus how many just want free stuff to enable their current lifestyle? We'll start there because there's three of them.
Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, it was more often than not. It seemed like a means to do other things. I had plenty of people say, "Hey, helping me out with this, man, means I can go get more A, B, and C." And some of it was, I can get more food, which we totally understood, and we would provide food vouchers for them all the time. So it wasn't like that was an issue either. So a lot of the time when we would give 9 months, and at the end of the 9 months there would be no progress, um, I would be I'd be shocked, because the case managers that were part of my team would help this individual go to countless job interviews, countless volunteer opportunities, just to meet different people and gain that community, and nothing seemed to change. But what did seem to change is, like, you would go to their apartment, and there would be a flat screen TV. Now I had some guy get one of those pull out chairs where you can kick your feet up and fall asleep on it. So as much as there was times where it was general stuff where they could go get new shoes when they wanted to, or stuff like that, a lot of it was just, little trinkets for their new apartment. Yeah.
What's the rough proportion of homeless with severe mental illness? 1 in 100, 1 in 2, 9 out of 10?
Yeah, I would say it was tough, because we had clinical case managers who were responsible for the people who had serious mental illness or some serious drug issue. Um, so I'll say, in the terms of the people who I would intake and start to the housing process with, out of 10, I would get about 5 who had a serious drug issue, who would tell me about it and say, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to do a lot of the things you asked because of this," or they would just show up to my site or the site of our nonprofit consistently high. So I'm just assuming that if you're consistently meeting me under the influence and you can't control that there has to be some sort of issue there. So I would say 5 out of 10 I would have some sort of barrier of drug abuse there.
And I'm glad that person said their history too, because
Right.
I don't know about you, but my family has also, I have a close family member who had a drug addiction, a serious drug addiction, and because of that drug addiction was homeless.
Right.
And I always, I really struggled with that too personally, because you maybe if you were to expand the family system to the community, to the
Right.
city, to the county, to the state, and you can kind of see how, like, even your, like, family dynamics are working themselves out in
Mhm.
policy. Oh, well, what if we just did this for blah blah blah, or we just did that? We don't want him to die. Because that's really, at the end of the day, I mean, families are, they just don't want their family member to die,
Yeah.
and in a
Yeah.
lot of these cases, and are desperate,
Right.
and don't know what to do. And I honestly don't know the solution. This person also is asking me after the third question, what do you think would improve it? Kind of touched on that a little bit already, but it's a difficult issue. And I think in my particular case, probably my interest in it, in seeking alternative viewpoints about it, is I know that I can say for a fact that on one hand,
Mhm.
the like handouts and everything did not really help my family member. Like
Right.
at this point, he had to eventually choose whether he was going to live or die.
Right.
And from that choice, made the decision to then clean up the rest. And then, but in other words, the housing was there. The
Right.
housing was there. Like the support system there, they were desperate to be able to be a support system and have housing and all that stuff available, but he just was not, that was just not his choice. He just did not want
Right.
to participate in any of that.
Yeah.
I know how just heart-wrenching that is for families, because I've lived it.
Yes.
At the same time, I also know that, like, there were people out there that probably did help him get a sandwich or a glass of water or something, and that maybe did get him through a night or two, which then got him to the point where
Right.
he then maybe had the opportunity to make the choice that he eventually made. So I really do struggle with it, because I can see, I can see how both sides, like, I can see how the
Yes.
people who did help this person along the way gave him some extra time, to get to
Right.
the point where he could turn himself around. But
Right.
at the end of the day, it wasn't that itself that was going to turn him around. He really had to find it within himself that he wanted to do that.
Right, and I think going off that, I think that's why I really wanted to shout out Michael Schellenberger, in that tweet, because his policy of shelter first, housing earned, I think could go a long way for people, because it would first clean up just the street atmosphere of homelessness, and take away the encampments and any open air drug scene like the big one in the Tenderloins of San Francisco. And providing shelter with on-site members who are there to help in any way. And when I would go do outtakes or intakes with homeless veterans at the veterans tent, that was the same deal. They were giving shelter first there, and then they could get the housing services from us. So there was, like I said, there was more funding for the veterans, so they had a little more. But I think if a general policy were to be housing earned but shelter first, just to get the streets cleaned up and have a spot where people can really focus in on, and really, if we want to put all this money and we want to do this, like, that would be a wise investment. Opening up shelters to help these people start there, and then earning the housing. Just like, I mean, you and I know we live in a house, and this does not mean that all our problems are now magically gone because I can sleep in my own bed in the apartment. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So
Right, and I I lost my job over the videos I was doing on COVID with the interviews, people
uh,
questioning COVID policy. I
yeah,
was fired over that, and thankfully I'm married, and my husband's business is doing okay. But
hmm
I saw how quickly things can turn. I mean,
right, right,
if I had just lost my job, and I would say I was a single mom, and like, what I would want there to be something available, So
totally,
I'm definitely not somebody who's like, thinks that there's just no room for a social fabric or a
right,
net to
right,
catch people. Because I could totally see how quickly that can turn over for some people. But at the
yes,
same time, I think you got to be realistic too, like you're talking about with whether it's like a one size fits all approach, or uh, what what resources you could be draining for exactly those people that you want to help, because
right,
you're enabling a dysfunctional system that you really need to fix on the other side. So it's just an important conversation to have. I'm glad we're having it.
yeah.
I am curious too, from your standpoint, like, does this conversation happen within the world of housing first, or is everybody just like really bought in on it and it's not something you can question? Is it just sort of anathema to say, guys, I don't think this is working, or do you have
Right.
lively debates about it?
Uh, Quick answer is no. There's no lively debates about housing first in a housing first environment. But when there is lively debates, when you and the crew members go out and you talk about just general clients and services, you go, man, I don't think giving this person a house is going to help them fix the problem here. And we would all go, yeah, no way. But we need to find housing for them. So it was like a general known thing, subconscious. We all knew, like, hey, giving this person a house won't help the obvious problems we see that we're experiencing with them daily. But there was no at all general conversation. It was like, hey, is this policy working? What do you think we should be doing different? Should we be maybe getting new housing partners? Because I don't know if you're familiar with SROs, they're single room occupancy, which is basically a tiny single bedroom room in what used to be an old hotel. So it's gutted,
Hmm.
and you have a bunch of homeless individuals living in there. And there's one floor for 30 people sharing two bathrooms, right? So we're we're putting we're not even putting people in somewhat half decent areas, and we're still shelling out $700 a month at this place, and it's like ridiculous. So we're giving, for lack of a better term, slumlords consistent monthly income and consistent business from our organization, while they just provide absolutely nothing for the client besides just the bare minimum and to pass a housing inspection to show there's no roaches. So as much as giving homes sounds crazy, some of the homes we did give were like, you wouldn't even want if we offered it to you. So, yeah.
Would you support recreating insane asylums to house and treat those who can't get themselves out of homelessness? And this is an interesting question I have
Mhm.
wondered about for a long time too, like forced uh I don't even know what you would call it.
Yes.
I'm a big civil liberties person, so my stomach gets queasy
Same.
thinking about it, but I also know that like I know people with close family members. I have dear friends with close family members who have severe mental illness, and their family has taken the effort to pay for them to
Right.
basically be housed, right? And to be in a facility. But like a lot of people don't have that support. You know, what are you going to do? And you're just left. So, but then the state, what do they do with you? I mean, they can't
Right.
force you to just be, or the prisons end up becoming the
Exactly.
asylum, right?
Yes.
So I don't know the answer to that one. Like I said, I really don't like the idea of locking people up
Yeah.
again, right? But at the same
Yes.
time, I can see why you would ask that question. What do
Right.
you think about that?
Yeah. I, I'm with you on a lot of what you just said. I do think it does make my stomach turn, forcing people to receive services in a way. But at the same time, the system we're in, forcing individuals to accept people on the street and just say like, "Hey, that's just what it is. It is what it is." Also, doesn't seem okay. I think there could be, and off the top of my head, I couldn't give you anything good. I'd have to flesh it out. But I do think there could be some sort of policy or some sort of restrictions or government oversight. And I know less government's probably better on a lot of these things, but some sort of government oversight onto how those asylums are run. And because back in the day when, the time of the one flew over the cuckoo's nest, some of the most horrific stuff was going on in there. So I do think if there was a better oversight to kind of wash people's minds of what the tragedies of what was going on back then, I do think it could have some benefit for the people who are just consistently having trouble.
Well, and like I was saying too, I mean, to say we don't still kind of have that in the sense that
Right.
you're getting locked up in jail for
Right.
your mental illness. I hear sheriffs and police chiefs talk about this all the time, that they're sick and tired of being their area's mental health facility, and
Yeah.
that's just they just end up doing that when they're not. That's not really their job. They're not
Right.
trained to do that. So it finds its way somehow. So like, what is the answer to that? I don't know, but I certainly know that just giving, punting it to law enforcement does
Right.
not seem like
No.
the right idea.
No.
Okay, a couple quick questions before you go.
Yeah.
What types of housing first models are available? For example, apartments downtown versus residential centers
Yeah.
in the suburbs versus camps outside town versus other options.
Yeah. So it runs their gamut. We could get anything. So I was responsible for the city and the county. So I was able to find any local city apartments or anything in the county. And honestly, it ranged from sober living places where some of our clients did say, "Hey, I want to live in that environment. I do think it would help." So we put them in a sober living environment, or we would find someone who was okay with rooming in a place with someone who was homeless, and we would do a roommate situation, and we'd all sign contracts and let them know that we are here to here to help if anything does go sideways. But most of the units I would house people in would be their own single bedroom apartment, or like I just told you a little bit ago, the SROs, which was a shrunken version of a studio where they would be sharing bathrooms and showers. So you could think of hostel in a way. It was more of a hostel environment in the housing sense. But most of it was apartments. And for the most, I would say 85% of the people I housed got their own apartment. So,
All right, last question. As someone who experienced homelessness and also worked in the field of homeless services, I am very interested to hear this guest. As far as a question, how much per night do the shelters get for each person who sleeps there each night? In Boston, it was something like $100 per night per bed, cost of sheltering someone versus $1,000 per night for a hospital detox day versus about $50 per night to put them in a single room occupancy rooming house. This was pre-pandemic.
yeah, I believe that those figures do run about the same out here, but a little different. The VA gave a lot of donations toward the SSVF program, which was mine, is Selected Services for Veterans and Their Families. So I think they It was a little more in depth, but if you look at some general statistics, I believe it costs, I know this is a little side bender I'm taking, but I believe it costs upwards of $860,000 to house one homeless individual in the state of California that I'm living in. I'm not sure the numbers in different parts, but if you're looking at the cost of a bed or the cost of housing someone in this housing first structure, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars per person. And if you want to, subjugate that towards, you're looking at how much gets spent on like a child for school, it's much less. So there's definitely not a correct giving on the sense of where our money should be going in sense of building people up in that way.
Tyler, that's all I got. Is there anything else you add before you go about, I don't know, what you're planning on doing next or how people should follow you or any final closing thoughts?
Yeah, you can keep following me on Twitter. I'll be writing an article. I'll push it out on my Twitter. Some guy came to me and asked me to write a little piece on housing first. So I'll be putting that out and I'll put the link out there on my bio. But if you're also interested in Shelter First Housing Earned, I highly recommend going to look at Michael Schellenberger's page. And if you like podcasts, go check out his podcast with Joe Rogan. It's super insightful and interesting. Other than that, thank you for having me, Allison. And anytime you want to have this conversation again, I'm here for you.
I appreciate it. All right, Tyler, thanks so much.
Awesome. Take care.